When my dad lifted his glass that night, looked straight at me across the dinner table, and said, "Some kids make you proud. Others just take up space," I swear the whole world froze. My mom's fork clattered against her plate. My sister's smile vanished, and I just sat there staring at the man who'd raised me, who I'd spent years trying to make proud, feeling like my chest had caved in. He didn't even blink. He just took another sip of his whiskey like he hadn't just destroyed me in front of my entire family. And the worst part? I knew he meant it. He'd said cruel things before, but this one was meant to cut deep. Tell me honestly, would you have stayed quiet? Or would you have said something back to your own father if he said that to you? Because that night changed everything for me. It's strange to think about how we got there. My dad wasn't always this cruel. When I was little, he was my hero. He used to carry me on his shoulders, take me fishing, tell me stories about when he was my age and how he built his life from nothing. He worked construction, long hours under the sun, and he was proud of that, proud of being a man who didn't need help from anyone. And for a while, I thought that was what strength looked like. My mom was the peacekeeper, always smiling, always trying to balance out his temper with warmth and patience. My younger sister, Lily, was his favorite. She was cheerful, confident, and the type of kid who always knew what to say. Dad used to call her his little champ. I was quieter, more reserved. I liked drawing, reading, fixing old gadgets, things that didn't really impress him. By the time I was 16, our house was a minefield. My dad had started drinking more after losing a big contract at work. Money was tight, tempers were shorter, and the smallest mistake could set him off. One evening, I accidentally spilled paint on the garage floor while working on an art project. He saw it, lost it completely, and yelled, "You can't do anything right." "Can you?" I tried to apologize, but he wouldn't let me speak. "When I was your age, I was already working. You're wasting your life on this." Nonsense. That was the first. "Tom, I saw something." In his eyes, that scared me, not anger, but disappointment, like I'd failed some invisible test he'd been giving me since birth. From then on, I tried harder. I
Like
joined the
I'd failed
basketball
some
team,
invisible
even though I
test he'd been
hated
giving me
sports.
since
I
birth.
stopped drawing because he called it a hobby for losers. I worked part-time at a grocery store after school just to show him I could pull my weight. Every time I thought I'd done something he'd be proud of, he'd move the goalpost. When I got my first paycheck, he laughed and said, "That's cute. You made in a week what I used to make in a day when I scored a B+ in math." He said, "Why not an A?" I kept telling myself that if I just worked harder, one day he'd see me differently. Then came the night of my sister's graduation dinner, the night everything exploded. Lily had just gotten accepted into a top university. She'd been offered a full scholarship, and everyone was buzzing with excitement. Mom organized a fancy dinner at our favorite restaurant to celebrate. I was genuinely happy for Lily, I really was, but part of me felt invisible. Every conversation revolved around her achievements, how proud Dad was, how bright her future looked. And then, halfway through dinner, Dad raised his glass for a toast. I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd say something nice about both of us. Instead, he smirked, looked right at me, and said, "Some kids make you proud. Others just take up space." The silence after that felt like a physical weight. My throat tightened. Mom whispered, "John?" in that warning tone, but he ignored her. Lily's eyes filled with tears, and she tried to change the subject, but it was too late. Everyone in that restaurant who overheard him was staring. My face burned with humiliation. I wanted to shout, to tell him how cruel he was, how hard I'd tried, but I couldn't get a single word out. I excused myself and walked out. I didn't go home that night. I wandered around for hours, eventually ending up at an old park near our neighborhood. It was dark, quiet, just the sound of wind through the trees. I sat on a bench and replayed that moment over and over again, wondering how a father could look at his own son and say something so vicious. That's when something in me finally broke. For the first time in my life, I stopped trying to win his approval. I decided I was done being the kid who just took up space. The next morning, I packed a bag. My mom tried to stop me, tears streaming down her face. begging me not to leave like this. I told her I needed space, that I couldn't live in a house where every word from my dad felt like a bullet. My dad didn't even come downstairs. He knew I was leaving, he just didn't care. I stayed with a friend for a few weeks while finishing school. I got a full-time job at a small electronics repair shop. I'd always been good at fixing things, and for the first time, that skill actually meant something. The shop owner, Mark, became like the father figure I'd never really had. He encouraged me to take community college classes in electrical engineering, and slowly my life started to take shape. But even as things improved, that one sentence from my dad haunted me. Every time I felt proud of something I'd accomplished, that voice would echo in my head, "Some kids make you proud. Others just take up space." I tried to shake it off, but deep down I wanted him to see that I was worth something. I wanted him to regret ever saying those words. A few years later, I got my first big break. I designed a simple but innovative circuit board that helped reduce energy waste in small appliances. I pitched it to a local tech startup, and they hired me as a junior engineer. It was the proudest moment of my life. My mom called me every week, thrilled to hear how well I was doing. But Dad? He never asked. He never called. Not once. Then one day, out of nowhere, I got a message from my mom. "Your dad's company went bankrupt," she wrote. "He's been struggling. Maybe you could call him." My first instinct was to delete the message. After everything he'd said, after how he'd made me feel worthless, I didn't owe him anything. But part of me, the part that still remembered him teaching me how to ride a bike, how to hammer a nail straight, hesitated. A few weeks later, I went home for the first time in years. The house looked smaller, emptier. My dad had aged dramatically. His once powerful posture was gone, replaced by a quiet, defeated slump. He didn't say much when he saw me, just nodded. We sat in silence for a long time. Finally, he cleared his throat and muttered, "You've done well for yourself." It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest thing I'd ever get. And just when I thought maybe we could start to rebuild something, he said it again, different words, same sting. "Guess you finally decided to stop taking up space." He laughed like it was a joke. But my blood boiled. That's when I realized he would never change. He didn't see me as his son. He saw me as his failure. So that's the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you keep trying to make peace with someone who constantly belittled you? Or would you walk away for good? When I finally spoke, my voice was steady. I told him, Dad, you're right. Some kids make you proud and others just take up space. But maybe it's because some fathers build and others just tear down. He stared at me, his face blank. I stood up, told him I forgave him, not for his sake, but for mine, and walked out. That was the last time I saw him alive. A few months later, my mom called to tell me he'd had a heart attack. He was gone before the ambulance arrived. I felt numb. There was sadness, sure, but also relief. The pain, the bitterness, it ended with him. At the funeral, people kept telling me how proud he'd been of me in recent years. Apparently, he'd bragged about my job, about my inventions. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The same man who once told me I took up space had been out there, telling people I was his brilliant son. Maybe he did feel proud, in his own twisted way, or maybe he just couldn't admit he'd been wrong. After the funeral, I went back to the park where I'd sat that night years ago. The bench was still there. I sat down, closed my eyes, and for the first time, I didn't hear his voice in my head anymore. I thought about everything that had happened, the hurt, the struggle, the growth, and I realized something important. Sometimes, the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest, and sometimes the only way to heal is to stop trying, to fix what's broken, and start building your own peace. Now I run my own small tech company. I hire young people who remind me of who I used to be: quiet, underestimated, overlooked. I tell them what I wish someone had told me. You don't need anyone else's approval to know your worth. And every time I see one of them succeed, I think about my dad, maybe in a strange way. He taught me the most valuable lesson of all, what kind of man I never wanted to become. So, yeah, that's my story. My dad once raised his glass and said, "Some kids make you proud, others just take up space." I guess I proved him wrong. If you were on my side, if you've ever had to fight for your own self-worth, hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories like this. And tell me in the comments, do you think I was right to walk away? Or should I have kept trying to make peace? Thanks for listening, and I'll see you all in the next story.